Mr. Johns, please go ahead.
I'm really glad that my colleagues have brought up the carbon tax, and I've got some comments and maybe some questions that maybe you can help me with. Now, at $170 per ton, can you tell me about what percentage of households would get a rebate on that?
My understanding is that all households will get a rebate. That's how the system is designed. Yeah. The issue is whether they will get a rebate that exceeds what they have paid in carbon tax, directly or indirectly. And my understanding is it varies by province, but the majority of households will get more in rebate than what they pay in carbon tax, either directly or indirectly.
Yeah, I believe it was 80% outside of Nova Scotia, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so the 2 out of 10 households that aren't going to get it, they're higher income earners. Generally. They can afford to, buy a hybrid or put in a heat pump. That's the idea, right? Okay, great. Now, I just wanted to clarify, because sometimes we wonder who's fighting for the 2 out of 10 and who's fighting for the 8 out of 10. I'd say I'm arguing to fight for the 8 out of 10 to make sure that they're not picking up the tab. So when we look about, the tab, and I'm going to read this quote from Andrew Coyne here in the Globe Mail, and he made a comment about your report, and I appreciate your report, but he writes, the alternative to the carbon tax is not nothing, but something else, subsidies and regulations, and the cost of these, as every study shows, costs that are paid not by, quote, the economy or, quote, the big polluters, but by households, is multiple times that of carbon pricing. More to the point, under the alternatives, there are no rebates. Not only are the costs greater than under a carbon tax, but 100% of them fall on households. The rebates are zero. Can you comment on that?
Well, I think that's probably a fair assessment. One example was also the subject of our reports, of one of our reports, the Clean Fuel Regulations, which impose obligations on producers and importers, so they impose obligations which have costs, but there is obviously no rebate that's provided to anybody because the costs are borne by the producers and importers and passed on to the final users, consumers.
Right, so the 8 out of 10 would have picked up the tab, really, more likely than not, in that scenario. Now, in terms of costing of climate emergencies, you did some costing years back, I know that, and you've done it again since. In terms of doing nothing, have you looked at what it would cost for every half-degree increase in global temperature in terms of climate emergencies and the cost to everyday Canadians versus the current mechanism that we have?
So we have not costed doing nothing. What we have costed is, or tried to estimate the impact on the Canadian economy of climate change in 2 scenarios. One, stated policies. So everybody across the world does what they've promised to do and does it on time. And another scenario is countries do what they have done so far and nothing more. And we find that the impact on the economy is, no surprise, greater in a scenario where we do what we are doing, what's currently implemented and nothing more. But that estimate has caveats, big caveats, because it's one of the first serious attempts, or one of the first attempts at estimating the cost of climate change, and it does not factor in potential tipping points where climate exceptional events would become even more frequent, and the cost of these exceptional events. So it's a very first attempt at costing climate change, and it has numbers, but again, it's still something that is in its infancy.
Yeah, I think there was a report in 2013 or 2014 projecting the cost of climate emergencies. We far exceeded what even your office has projected. Have you considered looking at costing, offloading the subsidies and regulations should there be no carbon tax onto everyday people? Have you looked at what that would cost per household versus what they would get back? That way we've got a true idea of that 8 in 10 Canadians that are going to get a return. And if we remove that mechanism, what it would actually cost those 8 in 10 Canadians. Because I think that's a fair analysis, right, to do. And I think I'll start with that.
that's quite a start. So no, we have not looked at such a scenario. We tend to cost issues or items that are being considered or being implemented. There's a wide variety of alternative scenarios that we could cost, but as you can imagine, when it comes to costing the impact of climate change or various types of regulations or taxes, it tends to be complex pretty quickly. So we have to limit ourselves to either the most likely scenario or what is before
I think there's
Parliament.
the do-nothing fantasy land, or there's the subsidies and regulations, which is going to be on everyday Canadians, or the current model, which is that 8 in 10 Canadians get it back, and the 2 out of 10 Canadians that can afford it pay, which they should pay a little more to contribute because they can afford to.
And there's also a scenario where we don't have to do that much. We just have to implement new technologies that will
Right, the 2 in
take
10
off.
buy the hybrid.
That
They
is
save money.
that
They
is our
buy a
time,
heat
I'm
pump.
afraid,
Yeah.
Mr. John.